So I am very pleased to introduce this evening panel, which has star power and lots of brain power that's a part of it. And I'd like to bring to you Maria Supporter, award-winning journalist that we're fortunate to see here in our Atlanta community, as she introduces and moderates the evening conversation.
Let me introduce our very honored panel here. And we start with C.T. Vivian, who made time in his schedule in between meeting with President Obama and everyone else that he's been great civil rights leader, currently the Dean of the Urban Institute at the Interdenominational Theological Center. Aren't you still CEO of SCLC? Oh, you left that. I mean, no longer there. Okay. And then obviously, recent recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And good all-around troublemaker, right? Yeah. We have our distinguished Secretary of State, Brian Kemp. And I have to say, he has been very helpful giving me advice on everything we've done wrong at the Atlanta Press Club debate series. No, he's been very helpful in letting us know what we should do to make sure we have full participation of the candidates, and I appreciate that. And then we have another local hero, and maybe national hero, I should say, after seeing her on full form yesterday at the Atlanta Rotary, Sally Yates, our U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. Yeah, y'all can give a clap. She has definitely gained a national reputation for all the work that she's done in helping stop human trafficking. Given that Atlanta is a center of human trafficking. But we will start. As y'all know, the topic of this is Perspectives on Voting Rights and Enforcement, and titled A Conversation. So, and I want this to be a conversation, but we're going to start with the dean among us, C.T. Vivian, if you can give us some historical perspective about, given that we are on the 50th anniversary here, why the Voting Rights Act was so important, and talk about why is it still needed today if you do believe so. And let's, yeah.
And I do believe so, all
Okay.
right? So that's the easiest one, because I think this is...
Well, why don't you give us a historical perspective
Okay.
so we can get, and if you can talk into the mic so everyone can hear you. We don't want to miss a word you have to say. Closer to you.
Yeah, okay,
Or
let me
move-
get
move the
closer to
chair.
it. Right, all right.
Yeah. They say kiss the mic.
Is it...
Not literally. I mean, just get close to it.
Okay. Is that African Americans have tried to vote since the first chance of having a chance to vote. In fact, we died in the first battle with the British in this country for the right just to be here, and it grew into that right to vote. There is no time in this country that we have not fought for the right to vote. I mean, fought for it. I mean, being willing to die for it, and in great numbers. We fought in every war in this nation hoping to get the vote, right? Is that even when refused, we still continue to attempt to be a voter in this nation. It's a good part of everything that we have thought about, everything we've been a part of, and when we think about it, that was the necessity of our time. When white Americans did not have to vote, there was a time when we were, in fact, making certain that we voted. We had to continue to prove to America.
Got to get a little closer.
Is
You
that
got to,
right?
you got to, maybe,
Is there anything under there?
no, you can,
Okay. Is that,
No, don't push it away from you.
you know, I didn't even notice that. I'm glad you did. Is that, yeah.
He's scared of it. Okay.
Is that my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother had asked the same question, to be a slave or, in fact, to be a person, to be a free person or to be a slave in this country. The choice, yeah, because the only alternative was to, in fact, be murdered. It was understood by the people in this nation until we understood as well that you'd have to take that chance. I can't help but think of my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, because he escaped from slavery, right, in order to fight in the Civil War. And then he came back and took his wife because he was not able to marry her until after the war was won. So he came back, married her, and they went out of that state into another state so that they could, in fact, begin to own property. Is that the vote was the basic understanding for every African American who had any desire to be free. It was to prove to America how important that the vote was to us, and hopefully that they would allow it to be important to them, important enough so that everyone who helped win this war, the series of wars, because we started with the Revolutionary War, right, is that would have a right to vote. We found that that was a very, very difficult thing to do, but we were willing to stay with it because we really, truly wanted to be free. And that made the central difference in our lives. There were over 200,000 black soldiers fought in each of the wars that we were a part of, right? For one purpose, is what everybody else white in this country took for granted, is that the right to be a citizen, right to vote, right to move around. None of those things did we have. We had to fight for them without doubt.
So when the Voting Rights Act passed, did you feel like that was a culmination of everything that your ancestors had worked for?
Yeah, in fact, we started thinking about it with your ancestors in mind. See, there was never a time that you didn't think about your ancestors being in this nation against their will and driving and fighting to have a chance to fulfill America's promise, with or without them, right? It was a part of everything that we had wanted. Now, I thought that was a decision I would never have to make, and I thought it was a decision I would never have to make because had it not been made for me by generations before me, not generations before me, right? And then only to find that I was a part of the civil rights movement, fighting again over the right to vote, all right? And it was a struggle to be free because it was the struggle to vote. In fact, in the civil rights movement, it was one man, one vote. and we changed it, of course, to one woman, one vote, right? Is that because it became very, very important. We saw black women in the civil rights movement, right, still having the same problem in just a slightly different way, all right? Is the because and so we were all for trying to have that struggle for everybody. Is that it was a decision we all had to make. Now, I never, but the real kicker for that was I never thought I would ever see white men and women have to fight for their right to vote. And then I found that not only did they have to fight for their right to vote, but that that young white people joined us in that struggle to fight, right? Is that and gave us some faith that America would one day really wake up, and even the South would vote, right? As that in the civil rights movement, we were allowing every person, every citizen to vote in every election. That was our dream. I learned the will to, I learned the vote as the only American freedom that would guarantee anything for a future. To fight for it didn't guarantee anything. To have the promises of the nation didn't have anything to do with it, because the promises were made all year after year, time after time, time after time. But the promises did no good. They meant very, very little.
But if we fast forward to today, because I do want to have the other.
Well, I just wondered how much of this you wanted.
Well, if today we do have an African American president, and some might say, well, do we still need the Voting Rights Act? You know, and I'm just.
Oh, please do.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, this is a part of the conversation, and
That's right.
are we?
People that would say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm asking you, what would be your reason to say, yes, we do still need the Voting Rights
Oh,
Act? Because we started out at that point and you said yes, and I want to hear.
Until the promises are really made to be free, we won't have we will have to continue to struggle for it. In fact, there was an attempt to try to buy everyone's vote. See, it is no longer a matter of black-white. It is, in fact, a matter of will white people choose to vote or have a chance to vote? Is that the thing is to vote, yes. The thing is, but will it be bought, or will it in fact be yours as a piece of freedom? We're right at that point today.
So should the South be targeted, or should this be something that's a national, applied nationally?
It's going to have to be, because a national understanding, because if the South's vote is bought, so in fact will the North have to wonder whether they will even be able to win anything or not, right? Is it a matter of the billionaires being able to decide the future of voting in America, black or white, or will it in fact be that the decision is going to be made because we demand that it not be a matter of just those who have money buying out the rest of the nation? And
Okay.
this is a major for right now, and in fact we can't even afford to let it happen again.
Okay, well, let's bring in our Secretary of State, and let me ask you, Brian Kemp, do you believe that the Voting Rights Act is still needed? And If so, or if not, please explain why. And what do you believe about the South being targeted, and whether there should be some kind of national application?
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here. I decided to come and do this because I figured if I got here early enough, I could sit between the Reverend Vivian and Sally Yates, and it'd be a made-for-TV picture in front of these great folks. So I've already raised my stature by being here before I've even said anything. So I appreciate the opportunity. And it is a great time for us to be talking about this with our elections calendar that we have, and I'm sure that we'll get into that here in a little while. You know, I think there's a perception, and I think it's somewhat perceived by the media that the Voting Rights Act has gone away, and that is not the case. It is still intact. The only thing that has gone away is Section 5, the preclearance that affected a number of states, and basically now you have all 50 states abiding by the same rules and laws that have always been there in the Voting Rights Act, and I certainly support that. We fight for that every day in the Secretary of State's office to make sure that everyone that is eligible to vote in this state has an easy time getting registered, and they participate in the process if they would like to. And I think both sides of the aisle would tell you that we have defended that regardless of our politics. And I think you can look right here in this county where we're sitting in the last election with issues of, Morehouse students, other most probably Democratic-leaning voters being disenfranchised because of registration issues, and it was the Secretary of State's office that was really leading the charge and trying to get answers, and we were the office that the people were really calling to make complaints. Now, I will tell you that we have been working very hard with the Fulton County Board of Elections and the new director there, and I do feel like things are moving in the right direction. But I think instances like that and others around the state, people will tell you it does not matter what the issue, if it's voter fraud, if it's disenfranchisement, if it's people not playing by the rules, that the Secretary of State's office, I mean, we follow the law and we expect people to do the same, and we expect them to follow the state election board rules. And the rules or the laws in the Voting Rights Act are still there. We've still got to follow them. It doesn't matter if it's the state, if it's a county or a city doing redistricting or what have you, they still have to follow the law. We're only talking about the preclearance issues that are here. And my personal opinion is I think we should be all or nothing. There's been a lot of people in this country that have fought for equality and making sure that everybody had the same rights when it comes to voting and participation, and nobody applauds that more than I do. But I think it ought to be, I think all the states should be treated the same. Either put everybody under the preclearance or either don't put anybody under it. I don't think it's fair to signal out, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, and the other, I guess it was one other state. Ryan, what was the other? Mississippi. But then, not include some of the other states that were under preclearance or anybody else for that matter. I fundamentally just think that that's not fair. I think if Representative Sensenbrenner thinks the new amendment to the Voting Rights Act that he's going to pass is good enough for Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, then it ought to be good enough for Wisconsin. And if it's not, then they ought not to be put in there. But I can guarantee you that if they would be subjected to the things that we have been in Georgia, they would not want to be underneath it either, because it is an administrative burden. It's costing our local communities a lot of money, a lot of time. It's a big administrative headache. And when you look at the violations that they have cited, that, by the way, these figures in the old formula were 40 years old, which is one reason I think it was thrown out. But if you look at the violations that they're citing, most of them were never adjudicated, and they also occurred on the local level. So you're subjecting a state to a huge administrative burden for something that local governments had done mostly through redistricting processes. And I just think that's fundamentally unfair. And I believe that if other states had been under the same scrutiny that the state of Georgia and the others that were under the pre-clearance process before, you would have found the same type things going on, and a lot of that is just, quite honestly, it's local politics. And a lot of that can change based on demographics. You know, you may have predominantly white city council trying to do some redistricting things that had a lot of politics involved with it, even though it still met the law of the Voting Rights Act. But you also could have the same thing happening in a district that's majority African American or Hispanic or what have you. So that's why I think the law is in place and why I think it needs to be in place to protect all citizens. But I do think it needs to be evenly applied to everyone, and that's my thoughts on that. So I'm glad to. Did I miss any other part of that question, or those
No,
three
I
questions?
think you handled most of it. And Sally, if you could kind of give us some perspective. I know your office really doesn't handle these issues directly, but I know you have some perspective as to why certain states were singled out, and explain why there was that not all states are treated equally, and whether there is some justification for that, and is it still necessary to treat them differently?
Well, as you pointed out, Maria, our office, I'm part of the Justice Department, but voting rights matters are generally handled by the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. But I'll try to give you my perspective anyway, although certainly probably not as informed as my colleagues would be at Maine Justice. You know, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits any discrimination in voting rights. That's been around for a very long time. And if our country had lived up to the promise of the 15th Amendment, we would never have needed the Voting Rights Act. But the fact of the matter is that we did not live up to the promise. And in fact, there were states, predominantly in the South, that enacted Jim Crow laws affirmatively to prevent African Americans from voting. And it took people like Reverend Vivian and others to force our country to live up to the 15th Amendment. It took folks like Reverend Vivian. He's way too modest to tell you about his personal role specifically in triggering the enactment of the Voting Rights Act. But it was, after Reverend Vivian had been one who had led, I'm sure you all have heard about the Freedom Rides, where folks were integrating the bus system. Well, after the Freedom Riders were really forced to shut down because it was just too dangerous. They were torching the buses and otherwise. It was Reverend Vivian and others who then took on and decided to finish those rides and went to Mississippi, where they're jailed and beaten and tortured. And then it was actually in Selma, Alabama, where Reverend Vivian, who can tell this story much better than I can, but again, was too modest to do so, when he was the national head of the SCLC, and was leading the right to try to register to vote. And they'd go day after day trying to register to vote. The sheriff there just wouldn't let them do it. Now, we got the 15th Amendment that says you're entitled to register to vote, but the sheriff there is not letting them do it. They actually get into a physical altercation where the sheriff hits Reverend Vivian in the jaw so hard he breaks his finger when he hits him in the jaw. Reverend Vivian's not throwing any blows here, but he's the one who ends up in jail, not the sheriff, as a result of this. So that's to give you a little perspective. Frankly, I don't think you guys should be wasting any time listening to me in this. You ought to be hearing from Reverend Vivian this whole time. So when you ask about sort of why certain states were singled out, Brian is right. The Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, that prohibits any discrimination, applies to every state across the country. But there were, at the time the Voting Rights Act was enacted, certain states that had Jim Crow laws on the book. They had laws that were there specifically designed for the purpose of preventing African Americans from voting. And so those states were subject to the pre-clearance requirement that he mentioned there, that before you can make any changes in your voting laws, you've got to get either the Justice Department or a three-judge panel in D.C. to certify that that is not going to have a racially discriminatory effect. And so that's where the pre-clearance requirement comes from. Now, it's been re-examined over the years. It was re-examined in the 70s, re-examined in the 80s. I think most recently the Voting Rights Act was reaffirmed by Congress in 2006 under President Bush, unanimously approved in the Senate, almost unanimous in the House. So while we can debate whether the Voting Rights Act is a good thing, our Congress doesn't unanimously agree on much of anything. And the idea that the Senate voted 100 to nothing and the House was close, that ought to tell you something about whether Congress, after hearings about still the discriminatory practices that were going on in states in 2006, whether they thought the Voting Rights Act was still necessary, and they did. Obviously, the Supreme Court ruled last year that the pre-clearance provisions were, not that the pre-clearance provisions were unconstitutional, but that the criteria that were being used were based on old data, and that if you want to have pre-clearance, the Supreme Court didn't say you can't have pre-clearance. They just said essentially you've got to update the data, and Congress has to do that. Well, the chances of getting Congress to agree on much of anything right now on that is probably not very good. So that leaves us relegated to Section 2 and enforcing Section 2 of the Civil Rights, of the Voting Rights Amendment. But in terms of whether it's needed or not, just in the year before the Shelby case, for example, in Texas, under the pre-clearance provisions, there was a congressional redistricting map that the federal court there found discriminated against Latino voters. If we hadn't had the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act, which we don't have anymore, that redistricting would have gone into effect. Likewise, in South Carolina, there were aspects of their voter ID law that a federal court there found would have a discriminatory impact. And so aspects of that law were changed. Again, the only reason why a federal court was able to look at that then was because there was the pre-clearance requirement.
Yep.
What we're going to have to do now is, rather than being able to prevent states from enacting discriminatory voting practices, it's going to be the whack-a-mole kind of system that we were in before the Voting Rights Act. And what Congress had said then, the reason why they put the pre-clearance requirements in, is said you really can't do whack-a-mole, because as soon as the Justice Department goes out and sues on one thing that's going on in one state, they'll come up with something else, and there'll be something else over here, and some local jurisdiction will do something else. So they said you can't be constantly trying to stop all of those. So that's why you had pre-clearance. And I'll submit to you, we've come a long way. Things are a lot better now than they were back in the 60s. But we still have issues. We still have problems. And the position of the department, my personal position, is I disagree with the Supreme Court's decision. But they're the Supreme Court, they get to decide. And we'll have to go, but I can tell you that this Justice Department is committed to, as aggressively as possible, enforcing Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to ensure that every person has an opportunity to cast their vote.
Secretary of State Kemp, I didn't know if you had any comments to what Sally had to say, and and we had our own issues with voter ID, and some people were concerned about what that might mean in terms of being discriminatory of certain people, the elderly, or some folks who didn't have driver's licenses. Did you have any concerns that some people might feel excluded?
Well, I mean, as far as our photo ID law in Georgia, I mean, we've been sued many times before I got there, and some since I've been there, and the state has won every single one of those cases. So there has been nothing found to be discriminatory or preventing or anything like that. But I think, Sally certainly makes some good points, but one of the points she made is what one of the problems is. I mean, one of the big cases that she's talking about is South Carolina, and they're not going to be under this new formula, and we are. Alabama is not going to be under this new formula, but we are. So you can tell me that in 40 or 50 years that Alabama has done a better job of this than we have. I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think if you look and see who the co-signers on the bill, there's deals cut in Washington to figure out, hey, you sign on, you support this, we'll leave your state out and we'll put these other states in. Now, I don't know that's happening, but I'm sure there's a lot of politics going on up there. And again, I'm fully supportive of the Voting Rights Act. It needs to be there. We need to enforce it. We're doing that in the Secretary of State's office. I just think, like, if we're going to have a formula, if they're going to do a new formula, you need to use today's numbers and today's data, not data like they did in 2006 that was, 40 years old. Let's use today's numbers, because I guarantee if people look at what we've been doing in Georgia versus some other states around the country, the president's home state, for that matter, Illinois, if they had the scrutiny on them that we have on us, I can guarantee you that they would be in this formula. So my whole thing is, let's just treat everybody the same. Either let everybody have to get everything pre-cleared, or don't allow.
I'd be okay with that, by the way.
Yeah, and don't, or don't make anybody be under it, and then the states that, or the local jurisdictions that go in and do some of these things that are found to be illegal, then opt them in where they have to do pre-clearance for whatever the next 5 or 10 years until they can straighten themselves out. I simply, I'm an advocate for the Voting Rights Act, for making sure that everybody has equal opportunity when it comes to elections, but I'm also an advocate that you got to make it fair for everybody. I mean, it's not fair to pick, the winner and loser states, especially when you look at the cases that they're citing against us. I mean, they're holding the whole state accountable for mostly things that the local jurisdiction did that were never adjudicated. It was just, things that were brought up that the Justice Department thought would be violations. They were never, I believe I'm correct in saying this, that they were never proven in a court case or a settlement agreement. And I may be wrong on some of the details of that, but I believe that to be correct. And I think the thing to think about is, everybody talks about the big issues like the Texas redistricting and certainly the photo ID debate all over the country, but it's really the little things that are making the administrative burden so great on the local level and on the state level. If you want to simply move a voting precinct from, the volunteer fire department on Main Street across the street to the library, you have to get somebody to write that up, send it up to the Justice Department, and get pre-clearance for that. If we want to change, this is in the past when we had pre-clearance. If you wanted to change language on the voter registration form, one letter, one word, you had to get pre-clearance. If you wanted to if the local community decided that we want to change the way the local board of elections is made up, once that legislation passed, the state of Georgia or that local jurisdiction would have to send that up to get approval from the Justice Department, where the state of Tennessee did not. And that, to me, is just not fair. I mean, you either need to let everybody have these administrative burdens or no one, and then if you violate those, then you should have to opt in.
Reverend Vivian, you have been listening to your colleagues there to the right, Mr. Modest here. What are your thoughts, given what Sally Yates and Brian Kipp have said?
The point is that all of this has been done before, but we could never trust the people that was carrying it out. And this has been our problem.
Are you saying you don't trust Brian? I'm sorry, I was giving you a hard
time. That's been our real problem. And we were not in on making those changes. As a result of it, you're sort of cut, and there's nothing much you can do. And if you are the victim of the past, all right, things are better than they were, right? There's no doubt about that. But we never know what's really going to happen when we start to vote. We don't know how it is going to be worked out and we have no basic say-so about it. You can say, well, the citizens did. Yeah, the citizen did, but the citizens that are going to suffer for it did not have near the involvement that we had. And this has been our kind of problem. and it's how are we going to do that? What kind of we felt safe under the laws of the right out of the civil rights movement because we knew they were carried out. We were there to make certain they were carried out, right? But we haven't made certain of that since, and that's our real problem. This is why we really had real problems facing when the law was changed, only because we did not know, really not ask. All right, basically it was not ours to know, except to read it in the paper. But as far as really feeling as though that the real changes were going to stay changed, that's been our problem.
So what is a solution here? Do y'all have, and I'm going to throw something out. I've been intrigued with what California was trying with citizens panels to do redistricting. I mean, here we've seen highly partisan redistricting. It happened under Governor Barnes when he was in charge. There was, you know, the districts, congressional districts and the state and Senate and House districts were drawn the way, you know, he wanted them drawn. And then when the Republicans came in, were in charge for the 2010, it was the same very partisan drawings of the districts. In California, they decided to have nonpartisan citizens panels doing those to have maybe more rational redistricting. Is that a solution, or am I just, you know, dreaming some kind of, you know, never land here?
I'm not for certain. Very truthful. I don't know.
Well, don't just talk to me, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just throwing out California because they tried it. Is that a solution to try and get away from a Congress or state legislators that are so partisan?
I don't want to keep hogging the microphone here, but
No,
I mean,
we're sharing.
I think you make a very valid point, and I think, you know, I have a good friend that's the Secretary of State in Iowa, and they have a citizens panel that draws their districts, and you know that's why Iowa is a swing state. I mean, it's a you know that's one of the reasons. So they have some very competitive. You know, U.S. House districts, and you know, I think the legislature kind of flips back and forth. So, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made for that, but the issue is that you can't get around is like the formula that they used on Georgia, you know, 4 of the 5 violations were done at the local level. So you not only have to have somebody draw in the, you know, the congressional districts and the state and House districts, you also got to do it on the local level. And, you know, I'll never forget when I first ran for office, one of the reasons I ran is because I was mad about Governor Barnes' redistricting, you know, his redistricting map.
There were a lot of people who were mad about that one.
You know, I'm a Republican from Athens, Georgia, where we voted, the only county in the state that voted for Michael Dukakis. So it's a blue, you know, it is a blue city, the town I live in. But everybody there was mad because the congressional district that was drawn drew Athens and Savannah together, which is just, it's crazy. I mean, it's almost impossible to represent a district like that when you have to drive, you know, 200 miles from one end of it to another. And that really galvanized a lot of people in our community, regardless of what their politics are. But when I got elected to the state Senate, we started redrawing the maps, and then of course we had the court case that threw out Governor Barnes' maps, and we had a divided legislature at the time. And while the Senate, which I was in, we drew a map, the House never would act on that because the Democrats still control the House, and they just couldn't get a coalition together to get the votes to pass the map. So the courts drew them, And that was the maps that we've had up until redistricting here just a year or so, 2 years ago, I guess, now. And I'll never forget Keith Hurd, who was an African-American House member from Athens that I served in the local delegation with. When I was running for office, he would always get on the radio and people be complaining about redistricting, and he'd go, you know, you can call it whatever you want, but it's a political issue. You know, it's politics, and that by the law is okay. You know, I think the courts have ruled over the years that, you know, it's okay to have political redistricting. You know, people might not like it, but it's okay. But no matter what, whether it's the citizen panel, this political redistricting or whatever, they still have to follow the law. And that's, no matter how you do it, people still have to follow the law. And that's what I think, you know, we don't need to lose sight of, is we still have to do that.
Sally, did you have any thoughts about?
I wouldn't touch redistricting. I mean, when I say I wouldn't touch it, it's just too. And I understand your point about politics. I think we do have to be careful. It's one thing to say it's politics. It's another thing to be disenfranchising a group of Latino voters or African American voters or others, and how you're drawing the lines. That's not just politics. And I know you weren't saying that.
No.
But I think that's a whole different matter.
Well, and I remember the dirty secret back in early redistricting was when the Republicans and the African Americans kind of made a deal that we'll have African American districts and Republican districts. So it was kind of a marriage made so that you would not have white Democratic seats. I mean, the way the lines were drawn, it was. And I guess it's politics there.
There was
if you
no
do.
doubt.
No doubt politics, okay.
The greater problem to me is, will we remain a democracy? Is this
Okay,
going
how
to
do you
be,
go from here to there?
from-
Take me there.
Well, see, I think you've done all the talking you can do on this one, because we're just going back and forth on it.
Okay,
Because,
so how do we remain a democracy, or how
I
do
think that
we?
there is the larger one. Are we going to be an oligarchy, or are we going to be really a democracy? Is that there's every reason to think we will not, because what we looked at is when Romney was talking about his 47%, all right, it became very, very clear that he and the Republican Party had no desire to do anything but win with money, because they could do it, all right? Now, and given that, we're really talking about, are you going to have a small group of rich people telling all of us what to do?
Well, and people would say that the Democratic Party is probably just as guilty of having
But
money
no,
at the.
But we don't have as much. See, that is a real issue, and that's
Well,
the
if I-
issue for white people.
And we didn't
as
want to
well as
get
for us.
into, you know, the political back and forth of Republican and Democrats here,
I
but
just want you to get me President Obama's list where I can use it.
Well, no, you see,
I'm not sure they'd be voting for you, Brian, even if you get the list.
let me tell you why he won, right? Is because he outsmarted everybody.
Oh, yeah,
Is that we didn't get any money in Georgia. The money in Georgia went to the headquarters, right? Is why? Because we had to compete with all the money that they had, all right? Is that that the Republicans had, if at all possible. While they were spreading it out over everywhere, we spread it right in those 3 states that were going to decide the whole election. Well, that was just wise, right? Because that was the only way we could compete with the kind of money that was being presented on the other side. In fact, it was an interesting thing. If you remember, right at the end of the election, and then we'll talk about the hours, but at the end of the election, what had happened is the more airplanes, big airplanes, came into Washington for the end of that election than at any other time. I could quote that from other sources because it's hard to say that, you know what I mean, right? But I remember reading that definitely. I got it home somewhere in stacks of stuff, right? But when it came to their presence, they were there to have a good time. Man. They were really there to have a good time. They never really, because they were going to get rid of this guy that decided to make certain that everybody could have a healthy life. All right. So
Well-
since they were going to get rid of him, then boy, they were in to make certain, right? But they didn't do it because he'd outsmarted them. He had more money than they had for the last 3 states, right? And as a result, Democrats won.
Well, there were some unusual factors, I think, in both of those elections, and I think purposefully we did not want to get into the,
Okay.
into that part of it, but I do think we haven't totally exhausted the whole voting rights thing, because I think if we have, I don't think we can just throw our hands up and say, oh, well, the Voting Rights Act needs work on it, but we can't trust Congress to work on it. You say, well, the freedom rides, well, maybe we need to do that. I would like to see something maybe more constructive that maybe we can do as a society to guarantee that everyone does have that right to vote.
Well, I guess I would say, if we're going to try to maintain the democracy that we've built, as Reverend Vivian said, it seems to me that all of us should want to ensure that as many people as possible vote. And we should be doing everything we can in all of our states, those that were subject to pre-clearance or otherwise, to be encouraging and facilitating the ability for people to be able to vote. And I'll say I'm concerned when I see in efforts all over the country, not just in southern states, but all over the country, where there are efforts there that it seems to be to restrict access to the polls. And it can take place in a variety of different fashions. It can be in some voter ID laws. It can be in restricting early voting, which we know is really critical and actually does disproportionately impact African Americans, because the percentage of African Americans that vote early far exceeds others. It can be in efforts in some states now to require proof of citizenship before you can register to vote, requiring you to have a birth certificate or a passport, which like I have and my kids have, but there are a whole lot of people who don't have that, and that disenfranchises that group as well. So I'm concerned about those efforts, not just in the states that were subject to pre-clearance, but across the country that seem to be restricting the ability for people to be able to get to the polls and vote rather than facilitating that. And the Justice Department, despite the fact we don't have the ability to use Section 5 now, since Shelby County has actually brought 2 lawsuits, one in Texas and one in North Carolina, challenging, in Texas, I believe it's the voter ID law and the redistricting that was done there. In North Carolina, it's the voter ID law, and I've forgotten what some of the other aspects are there. It may be a citizenship requirement, but I'm not sure right now. So the department is now going forward to enforce Section 2. But what you're going to see is that it is taking like all the resources of the Civil Rights Division to handle those 2 cases. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in the rest of the country that's just going to go unattended to right now, because there's simply not, we don't have the resources to be able to file suit against every single state or local jurisdiction that is enacting something that is infringing on voters' rights. So that's of concern to me.
Okay, let's open it up to questions. Did I see a hand up in the back?
My head was about to explode. us sitting back there listening to some of it, because Section 5, while I do agree it needs to be expanded across the country, because we've seen, one only needs to see in the press that we're quite not there. We are looking at the world the way we wish it would believe, and we're not looking at the way the world it actually is. And in Georgia, we do have problems, and Secretary of State Kemp, we really have had quite a bit of problems here in Georgia that I don't think you're aware of, that you don't see.
What is your question?
I have a question as far as the enforcement. You're saying, you know, Section 5. How do we enforce the other sections? Does it make it easier for citizens to bring complaints using the other sections that are still in place of the Voting Rights Act?
Well, Sally, make it better answer that question about how citizens could bring action, but it'd be just like they have always done, instead of the Justice Department doing it or having to, you know, have the issue arise during pre-clearance. You basically just file a lawsuit, I believe is the way it works, saying, you know, and it happens all the time. You know, it's happened in Augusta with their redistricting map. You know, I remember during the Macon Bibb consolidation, there was all kind of issues down there with people would raise legal issues. So it's basically just an individual or a group of individuals would bring an action against whoever the jurisdiction is, whether it's the state, you know, state redistricting issue or local redistricting issue. You know, you may even have people file actions about where a precinct's located, because you know, some people may think this will be, you know, adversely affect, you know, one group over another and things like that.
Right, for most people of limited means or limited education, they would have no access to the resources to file a lawsuit. They wouldn't even know where to begin. And also I have
Well, I guess I would throw a question back to you. Well, how do they deal with that in 34 other states?
getting.
I mean, they're having to deal with the same issues there.
Right, but we're talking about Georgia, but and to be honest, I don't know how they do it. I
Right.
know that, all I know is Georgia, because that's where I live.
Okay.
So, and also, I also have a question about, I hear a lot about the fiscal cost of democracy. And I come from, my uncle served in Korea. My husband served in Vietnam. My daughter and my son-in-law served in Gulf War I and II. And I kind of have a hard time looking at the fiscal cost when I see my family's lives were being sent overseas to defend democracy at any cost. And we just had 2 wars where we spent quite a bit in treasure. And then to hear that, you know, to expand to make it easier for people to vote right here in the U.S., that we can't do it because there's a fiscal cost to it. I have a hard time understanding that, and someone needs to explain that to me, because I've seen people die.
Yeah, I'll be glad to explain that to you.
Because I don't understand what is the difference between the cost of someone losing their life overseas to expand, to bring democracy to another country, and then you tell me right here in the U.S. that there's a fiscal cost.
Well, let
And expand-
Secretary State answer.
First of all, let me thank you for your family service to our country. But as far as somebody having an ability to vote or register to vote in the state of Georgia, I will tell you that I know in the, gosh, I guess going on 4 years that I've been in office now, we have done a lot of things to make it, you know, have access for people that want to register to vote. We just 3 weeks ago rolled out the first state in the country, we believe we are, to actually have an app that you can put on your phone where you can register to vote online. Also have a one-stop shop for all your voter information, like where your precinct is. It'll take directions to that precinct. You can look at sample ballots. You can figure out who your elected officials are. You can actually track your absentee ballot now to make sure that it gets received by the county and gets voted. And if it is for some reason rejected, that you're notified of that. You know, we have 45 days of absentee balloting by mail in Georgia for no reason. We have 21 days of in-person early voting. Just a couple of years ago, I supported a piece of legislation dealing with early voting that made it mandatory that every county in the state had to have at least one Saturday to vote. So I would disagree with you. I'm not saying that we don't have issues here, that we don't have issues in other states. I mean, that's always going to be the case in elections. If you would hear the complaints that we get, it's quite amazing when you talk about voter fraud and irregularities and things like that. But I would tell you that as far as access and ease of voting and making sure that our citizens have the ability to vote, I would stack Georgia up with any other state in the country. And if any of you, if any of the people that you represent, or any of the people you hear about has an issue, you call my office and we will engage in that to make sure that people aren't being disenfranchised. You know, a lot of people don't realize we have a police force in the Secretary of State's office. I believe the first month I was in office, we created a Stop Voter Fraud hotline and an email address where anybody could call about any kind of issues that they're having, whether it be voter fraud, intimidation, you know, issues at polling locations like there's not handicap access, you know, any kind of complaints. I mean, we look at every single one of those, every single one of them.
So, sure, she may not need to go file a lawsuit. She may be able to work with your office and get your.
Well, I
And
think,
if there is and are there any kind of legal services that may be pro bono that
well,
would be
I
available?
think you're talking about lawsuits at the, you know, on the local level or state. I mean, if somebody's gonna sue over redistricting, you know, certainly when the Democrats were in charge, the Republicans found a citizen to file a lawsuit. And, you know, now that Republicans are in charge, you have, I don't know if they've done it here, but certainly around the country, you've had Democrats that would find, you know, someone to file a lawsuit and would help fund that. Most of that, I think, is on redistricting issues. So that's just, you know, how the process works, and it's the same, would be the same on the local level as well.
I have worked the nonpartisan election protection for the last maybe decade at least. And some of the calls that we got were about people who wanted to vote and wanted an easier way to vote. I also, one of my many gigs was I worked for the Secretary of State's office. And so I have checked out your new website. It is excellent, and I have to commend you for that. We heard from Cynthia Tucker, the noted journalist, about her family's issues, particularly the elderly people in a small community that didn't need voter ID because everybody in her little town knew each other. But I want to talk about the other side of the coin, where some of my college students called and they were very frustrated, particularly those 250 over at Morehouse who were trying to vote for the president the first time. And they said, well, why can't we just go to any polling place? You know, we can go to ATMs and get our money at anywhere in the world. And I said, well, you know, it makes sense because all of the records we were checking were in your office, one computer website away. So what I'm asking is, where in the scheme of the things can you think about allowing us to vote from our smartphones? We could pay our taxes, we could pay our bills, you could code us, you could encrypt it, you could call up our ballot, just like you're doing now. Why can't we vote on our smartphones or our computers? And, you know, I know there's a lot of investment in polling machines and polling places, and a lot of people don't feel that they are accurate, and I'm familiar with all of that. But, you know, I'm asking that that be considered because we're really just a keystroke away from it. And that would resolve the issue of people in the service not getting absentee ballots back in the time. I actually asked for an absentee ballot for Fulton County one day. I was in my office upstairs at 9 p.m. and I got a ballot at my house the next day. So I know it can work, but I don't really trust the Postal Service.
Okay, let him answer the question.
I don't blame you for not trusting the Postal Service. You know, on the military voting, one of the other things that I did when we first got in office, we got a piece of legislation passed, and Georgia was one of the first states to get passed the Military Overseas Voting Empowerment Act, and we've had, as I'm sure you know, had electronic ballot delivery for military and overseas voters for quite some time now, which has really cut the time in half for military and overseas voters, and we're very proud of that. Actually, over the last month, I've done a couple of things with some National Guard folks in Savannah and other places, you know, promoting that military voting and electronic ballot delivery. So I would ask that you all that have friends or family that are serving, make sure that they know about that. It's very simple to request the electronic ballot delivery. As far as, you know, what you're describing as vote centers, it's kind of like in your county, you know, if you vote on election day, you got to go to your precinct, right? But if you vote early, you can go to one of several places in the county, and you can vote no matter where you live in the county. And what you're describing to me is, why can't we do this statewide? So it wouldn't matter, like if you live in Fulton but you work in DeKalb, why couldn't I, you know, leave lunch from work in DeKalb and go somewhere in DeKalb and vote and have my ballot pull up in Fulton? And I think there will be a day that we could do that. But right now, I mean, we have a voting system that was implemented in, you know, 2001, 2002, and there's just not the technology there to do that on our current system. I think in the future that there potentially could be, but that's going to take legislative action, it's going to take appropriations, and that's something that you got to have, you know, the governor and the legislature and everybody kind of on the same page of. And then you also have to make sure that you have the security measure in place, that you don't have somebody that, you know, would vote at lunch in DeKalb, and I know none of y'all would do this, but come back and vote again in Fulton. And those type things, unfortunately, sometimes happen or potentially could happen. So, you know, we're just not quite there technology-wise, but I think we will be in the future. And it will certainly be convenient for people.
I wonder if that would raise a whole set of issues about people who don't have access to technology, and then you would say, well, are they being discriminated against? I'm just throwing out. I mean, but yes.
Eileen Brown. I am a community activist and not a hellraiser yet. I'm very involved. My one question is, why are the issues on the ballot for the primary elections, the Republican issues are not the same as the Democrat issues? Why is that?
Yeah. And I know my friend Mike Jablonski will correct me if I tell you wrong on this, but the party, the state parties decide what questions they want to ask for the primary. And I know that the Democrats have, I think, several questions that they're asking, and I don't think the Republican Party had any, did they, Mike? I can't remember. So, but it's the state parties that decide that, not the Secretary of State's office. We're the one that gets blamed for that, because when trying to remember what the issue was, but there was some question on a primary ballot. It may have been Sunday sales or something, and it ended up passing, and everybody thought that that was the real vote, and, you know, why can't we have Sunday sales? And it's really just it's more of a question to gauge what the people that vote in the Democratic primary, it's almost like a poll. You know, do you support Sunday sales? Do you support, you know, the Transportation Act expansion or what have you?
We have time for maybe a couple of more questions. I see the pretty lady in pink and then the one next to her down there. So we'll take those two for sure, depending how quickly the questions and the answers are.
Hi, my name is Courtney Fisher. I'm here because I want to be a part of the solution.
Okay.
To Dr. Vivian, I want to say congratulations on your Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Thank you.
To Secretary of State, I want to ask, based on the concerns that you've expressed today and heard from the audience members, if you can make a recommendation of what we can do individually or as a group to assist you in your efforts.
Well, I think the biggest thing we're trying to tell people about right now is our online voter registration system. You do have to have a state-issued driver's license or a state-issued ID to do that from the Department of Driver Services. And you know, when you think about this, every year you're going to have a crop of 17-and-a-half-year-olds. You know, when you get to be 17 and a half, you can register to vote. You have to be 18 to vote in the election per law, but when you're 17 and a half, you can register. So we are trying to get the word out to the 17-and-a-half-year-olds. Look, you can register to vote on your phone now, because most of these kids have driver's license. If they don't, they simply print the form out, send it in, and they can do it the paper way through the county. So the good thing about the online voter registration, it is saving the counties a tremendous amount of work. I got a really nice letter from Rick Barron today, I saw it today. It was actually emailed to me over the weekend, that he had sent, really praising the rollout of the online voter registration. Because one of the problems that we had last year in Fulton, and a lot of this happened with the Morehouse kids, is people would register to vote, and whoever took those application forms, either one or two things happened. They never made it to the county elections office. But they never got to the county elections office. We actually had a state election board case where someone that took voter registration forms, put them in their trunk, and they never delivered them to the county.
Wow.
So you had all these people that thought that they had registered to vote and had done everything they need to do, and then they went to the polling location and they weren't in the system because a person did not take them to the county and they didn't get entered. And we also believe that there's been some that were delivered to the county that never got done, as well as people that had sent in change of address forms and things like that. I had a lot of, being from Athens, a lot of people from Athens that were registered there, graduated from UGA, came to Atlanta to work, sent in change of address forms, never got processed. So they're up here working in Atlanta, and they go into, they can't figure out where to vote. They're calling us, and they're not showing up on the My Voter page. And we said, look, you can still go back home and vote. You just can't vote at your new Atlanta location. Well, the problem is a lot of these kids couldn't get off work. So they didn't get to go home and vote, and they basically were disenfranchised. So I think raising awareness that you can do the online voter registration now, that thing's not going to get lost. When you hit that submit button, it's showing up on the dashboard of the county registrar the next day, telling them you have a new registration that you need to work. I mean, there's no way they can miss it.
One of the concerns that I have had chairing the debates for the Atlanta Press Club is when candidates who are running for public office do not show up for debates. And to me, it's, if they're not showing up and they want to serve you, they want to represent you, but they don't want to be there with their opponents and answer questions, I have a problem with that. So I'm hoping that the public will put pressure on the candidates who do not show up, so that in the future they will. Yes, quickly?
Just real quick, I just downloaded the app, Kemp,
Oh, good.
and it's cool.
All right,
Yeah, bye.
validation.
By the way, too, I should have said this, but if you want to go, the app is free. You just shop for it under GA Votes. Sometimes if you type in the word Georgia, it, for whatever reason, doesn't take you there. Yeah, but GA Votes.
Well, let's thank our wonderful panel here tonight. Thank you so much.